Hi.
Okay. Yes, Ivana, I think we can kick off.
Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on the exciting topic of AI in healthcare, the future of life science. My name is Ivana and I'm responsible for healthcare sector at the Israeli Economic and Trade Mission in the UK. The aim of today's webinar is to explore how AI and data science will be shaping the healthcare industry now and moving forward, which problems and in what areas will these new technologies help to resolve, what obstacles are currently standing in the way, and when can we expect major changes to happen in healthcare. The discussion will shed light on these topics and also offer the different perspectives and experience from both the UK and Israel. The webinar will last approximately 1 hour. Your active participation is important for us, so you can enter your questions and comments in the chat box below. The selected questions will be answered in a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. First, though, we would like to start with a few welcoming words from Yariv Becher, the Minister for Commercial Affairs and the head of the Economic and Trade Mission at the Israeli Embassy in London.
Thank you, Ivana. Welcome everyone to our webinar today. As Ivana mentioned, a very exciting topic of AI in healthcare. Probably very timely as well with what we're experiencing around the world. A few words about the Economic Mission in London. Our role is to create partnerships and business relations between Israeli and UK entities, different companies, organizations, hospitals. We cover everything from Techini to cyber, with healthcare and life science being very important in the middle. We help Israeli companies to connect with potential partners in the UK, and we also work with British entities to help them tap into the innovation that's going on in Israel. This is part of what we're doing today. We have very interesting speakers and some interesting and very fascinating technology companies coming out of Israel. So I think this is going to be a fruitful discussion. I look forward to it. I want to thank all our speakers, especially those that took the time for the vacation to join us and manage our panel today. Thank you to the Israeli Export Institute for co-organizing our activity today. And special thanks for Ivana for putting all this together and coordinating. I look forward to hearing everyone's thoughts and insights. And we're here afterwards to help connect and facilitate engagement with whoever you would want to speak with. So feel free to reach out to Ivana. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yariv. We have organized this webinar in partnership with the Israeli Export Institute, and thus it is my great pleasure to welcome Angela Rabinovich, who is leading the Life Science Department at the Israeli Export and International Cooperation Institute in Israel. Welcome, Angela.
Hi, everyone, and it's really a pleasure to be here with all our partners, Ivana and Yariv from the Economic Mission and our colleagues from the UK and from Israel. We at the Export Institute, semi-governmental organizations supported by member firms and private sector, and the government of Israel, who promotes partnerships between Israeli techs and different businesses and organizations abroad. And my name is Angela. I'm leading the Life Science Department here. We are engaged annually with more than 800 health techs, hospitals, health management organizations, and other entities in the entire healthcare system on their actually international commercialization journeys. So, as we all witnessed, the year 2020 present probably the biggest transformation in the delivery of healthcare services, flipping up all that we assume to be the norm as patients and also as clinicians. So, but while many other industrial domains stretched over unbelievable scenarios, may we really believe in more interesting times in healthcare, just kind of a perfect storm of factors tapping into the promise and potential of information technology and definitely AI is a part of it. So I would say that's being as a digital nation, native digital nation, we have not been immune from this coronavirus pandemic, and still a very chaotic times here in Israel, and there is a lot of learning that happening on the flight in a lot of different healthcare settings. Someone learn from us, and we definitely learn from others, and this is where this webinar comes in, and I really believe that we are going to raise impactful insights for both countries here today. Thank you for everyone to be engaged.
Angela, thank you for that. And now I'm very excited to welcome and hand the word over to the moderator of today's panel discussion, Niamh McKenna, the former Health and Public Service Managing Director at Accenture UK. Niamh, the floor is yours.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Greetings from France, and apologies in advance if my technology is a little slower than normal, as I'm using borrowed tech today. Thank you very much for inviting me to moderate this panel. I think we've got some fantastic speakers lined up. As Ivana mentioned, I was the Managing Director for Accenture for our healthcare practice. In a few weeks' time, I will soon be the CIO for NHS Resolution. So I have a keen interest in artificial intelligence and the potential that it can bring, particularly to this sector. I think what will be interesting today, is to consider some of the differences between the potential, and certainly there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of conversation about what AI can bring, and what it's really actually doing on the ground, and where do we see the practical applications working versus some of the, will we all have an AI doctor robot accompanying us wherever we go. And so I think it'll be really interesting to explore some of those different aspects today. To kick us off, we have two fantastic speakers. So I will start off with Professor Viktor Novak. He is the founding director of the Soroka BGU Medical Research Institute and head of the research authority at Soroka University Medical Center. He has a very fantastic CV, and I think what I would be really fascinated to hear from you today is something around some of your epidemiology training and where you see, particularly in the light of our current COVID constrained situations, do you see an application for AI to support us in trying to make sense of what is actually a very new data set? And that, I think, is one of those challenging things for AI to deal with. So, Professor, I will hand over to you.
Thank you, Niamh, and it's great to be here and participate in this, I hope, interesting discussion. So probably I would start first from a bit of sort of personal information. First of all, I'm currently managing the Corona units of Soroka University Medical Center, which is the second largest hospital in Israel. So the Corona problem, I would put it this way, is very close to me, and the current situation is a very acute situation for us, probably for the rest of the world. Second point to make it is that I'm a practicing physician with a training in epidemiology, and the last 20 years dealing with different aspects of medical technologies. But about a year ago, I decided that the fantastic position that I used to have, during which I was working as a physician only 4 months a year, and the rest 8 months I was doing my research, I would rather go back to clinics. And the reason for this decision was exactly that, and exactly the topic of today's discussion. My feeling was that there is a disconnect between these fantastic developments in AI and big data world and actually field-level medicine. If you look in the current practice of medicine, it is rarely using computers. And computers are used only for documentation of the process, right? So the usual picture that you would envision, you coming to your primary physician or in the hospital, and everybody is sitting on the computer, but the computer is only serving us as a pad of paper, right? We're using this to collect the information. We're using this to look at the information, but we don't use anything else in this computer. And sometimes it is also counterintuitive to our patients, and probably to some of us, that the majority of contact now with the patient is through the computer. Basically, you can see this picture that your physician is sitting behind the computer, and he rarely even look at you as a patient. And so when I decided to come back and actually lead an internal medicine department in my hospital, it was because I understood that in the next few years, computers will be heavily introduced in our life as a physicians. But the point that was obvious to me is that for now, we as a physicians do not know what to do with them. And industry leaders and scientists also don't quite really understand how the physician will use the computer. And it would be fair to say, as our American friends are saying, it is that if you want to do something, you have two options. Either you are around the table discussing how that will be implemented, or you are on the table. And all of us practicing physicians underwent the trauma of introducing of electronic medical health record systems that were very painful and still are very painful for use for us. And actually, if you ask many physicians, they will tell you that this is the single most frightening nightmare, how you actually use your electronic medical record system and how you code and how you're basically dealing with it. And so the first thing that I did when I became a chief of the department, I actually, and again, it's quite counterintuitive, I asked my residents and my senior physicians not to enter patients' rooms with the computers. Because if you have kids, and all of us probably have kids, you can understand that computers are so incredibly addictive that once you have a computer or you have a screen in your reach, you would be focusing on this computer rather than being focused on the patient. And so here we have a situation that we are talking about AI, and we will be talking today about AI and big data and the entrance of this immense power into our life. And then I'm saying, well, you know what? Let's not use these computers within the reach of the patient or when you talk to the patient. Because I cannot ask them, and I tried at the beginning, ask them not to be typing during these rounds or during the interaction with the patients, not to be around the computer. But this is, again, it's almost impossible not to be like a magnet, I would say, not to be addicted to this wealth of the information that is in your reach. So here is the dilemma. On one side, we have all these amazing new technologies that I have no doubts that they will be used. And then from the other hand, we have quite conservative physicians, maybe like me, maybe even more, and actually a lack of understanding from our side how these computers and how this immense power will be used. So that's for me is the main, I would say, question that I have on the table.
Fantastic, and I think a worthy question, because ultimately technology, if it's not usable, then it just gets put on a shelf and ignored. So I think a good provocative start to our discussion. Our next speaker is Suzy Ali Hassan, who's the head of commercial engagement at UCL Partners, responsible for development of relationships in the private sector and the investment community and national international stakeholders. And Suzy, I think what would be really interesting to hear from you is perhaps what do you look for in terms of that practical application? If you're looking at organizations, what are the things that really mean that this is an organization that the likes of UCL would want to work with?
Sure. So to firstly explain UCL Partners as an organisation, so we're a membership of hospitals, clinical commissioning groups, higher education institutes across a population of just over 6 million people in north central London, out the borders towards Essex and north into Bedfordshire. So representing this ecosystem, we really focus on local population and system needs. So we represent a number of designations. The one I'm talking of today is the Academic Health Science Network, which is set up sub-regionally across England. So UCL Partners is one of 15, and very much as I've described, to respond to local need and support industry and technology, generate the evidence required to support adoption and procurement by the health system. AI, of course, is the emerging and sort of it's at a tipping point, I would say, at the moment, in terms of the interest that's there from clinical teams, clinical systems, but also the nervousness around sort of confidence in the evidence it requires, and also sort of patient and public acceptance of these solutions. So part of our role as that kind of arm's length body and facilitator of introducing new innovation into the NHS is to try and support that evidence being generated, and help streamline the adoption into actual clinical utility. Talking around sort of what big hospital systems, hospitals like UCL, UCLH, Moorfields, Great Ormond Street, others, major centres that are looking at new ways of delivering healthcare, particularly are in the light of COVID and the sort of virtual and digital transformation that's happened. It's often where the true value proposition of some of these solutions is provided to the health system. Often they're platform solutions, they have multiple applications, and actually industry or commercial bodies approach the health system saying, there you go, and there is little sort of support in really trying to orientate how it impacts the entire pathway. It's not just where it sits within an acute hospital, it's going to have a big impact on upstream and downstream of that pathway. And I think, as we may well be aware, the NHS being that bit fragmented, they can't realise that entire whole system ambition quite yet, but we are moving in that direction. One thing I'd like to say, though, is there's a lot of emphasis on how the NHS, is challenged with taking up these solutions, and there are lots of issues around, barriers to adoption for these sort of more innovative solutions. However, just sort of looking into a little bit around AI solutions and technology currently, a report published last year by the NIHR Innovation Observatory, which is based up in the northeast of England, sort of indicated that just over 50% of AI technologies are actually on market and have market authorization. So there is real low market availability for these solutions, and there is a disconnect between what is apparently there and what's actually there to be bought. So the NHS is challenged in that regard, particularly as well as I've described, where it begins to impact whole pathways, but is only being purchased by secondary care sites. So just nearly 60% of solutions are focused on imaging diagnostics, where they sit within secondary care, but have huge impacts to where that care is actually delivered and who sees the cost effectiveness or the cost savings of that intervention. So these are the kind of considerations I would urge companies to think about when looking at approaching the NHS as a market. I think one thing that's become quite clear through the COVID sort of epidemic, and our organisation, along with several others that we work closely with, have been supporting our NHS providers go virtual, and the transformation that's happened in these last few months has been rapid, and there is a lot of emphasis on wanting to sustain that change. However, what's been brought to the forefront, of course, is the sort of impact of health inequalities around digitisation of services, and actually AI as a blanket solution must be quite careful, particularly because it's controversial and how it's accepted by patients and public, that it doesn't exacerbate any of these health inequalities, particularly when you're looking across sort of population health and looking across whole systems. So really interested to hear about all the sort of, the comparisons with the Israeli system, which I understand have had a joined up electronic health record for decades compared to the UK. So wonderful to hear about how you've adapted to new innovation and technologies and sort of share some learning there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Suzy. And to support that view of how things are being done in Israel, we've got three fantastic leaders from some different companies who are operating at the moment. So what I'm going to do is just ask each of them in turn to just introduce themselves briefly and the company that they represent. So let's start with Aidf and Amir, who's the Chief Commercial Officer.
Hi, hello everyone. Cut me off if I talk too long, so I don't want to leave time for the others. So I am, as the name said, I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Aidf. It's a 2-year-old company developing a decision-driven platform based on AI and data science, but for the IVF industry and vitro fertilization. I could talk a bit more about that later, but the company germinated from people within the industry. So 2 physicians and our CEO, who was an embryologist for 14 years before, came from that world and saw that actually 42 years ago was the first IVF baby, Louise Brown in the UK. It happened I think her birthday was 2 days ago. And amazing things have happened in the past 42 years, but there's a lot of place for technology to come in and help make things more accurate and effective. A lot of the process is subjective, and we provide a solution for clinics and labs to make that process more effective and efficient. In the end, to make it more cost-effective and accessible to more people.
Great, thank you very much, Amir.
Sure.
And we've got Telias, and we've got Amit, who's the lead scientist at Telias.
Hey, hello everyone. I am Amit. I'm the lead scientist of Telias. We are basically a mental health platform assisting psychiatrists and physicians to prescribe the first, in the case of depression, the first antidepressant, in case of other disorders, other medications. The first treatment, the first time. That's the idea behind us. So we use both AI and clinical guidelines, and we collaborate with psychiatrists, which are members in our board. The idea is not to replace the doctors, but give like a decision tool to make a better decision towards which antidepressant to use in order to reduce the trial. Use the trial to reduce the error, use the data that we have to give a better treatment the first time. That's the idea behind Telias, and Predictix, our products.
Great, thank you very much. And last but not least, Kyle, who's joining us from Spark Beyond. And Kyle looks after the healthcare, pharmaceuticals and life sciences business operations across EMEA.
Thank you very much. That's a very warm introduction. Yes, so we're headquartered out of Tel Aviv, and Spark Beyond's, or our founders' missions, are preeminent computer scientists in their field, was to build a problem-solving machine. So a solution which very much reverse engineers the processes of data science using hypothesis testing. So the ability to generate insights, to uncover, unlock hidden patterns, correlations in data. So unlike my contemporaries, we're very much a general purpose research AI platform. So we're used within medical research, within pharma and life sciences, in the worlds of clinical trials and enrollments and patient selection, through to some more exciting use cases and engagements, which I'll be delighted to talk about going forward.
Great, thank you.
Pleasure.
So I'd like to open up now and let's pick up on a couple of questions. At the beginning of the intro, Victor talked a little bit about the dilemma between some of the new technology and adoption rate, in physicians, and how we can kind of bridge that gap. And I'm wondering, Amir and Amit, whether you have any perspectives from actually deploying your technology in real life situations, and how have you managed to help physicians, adopt that new technology? What have you found that's really helpful?
Okay, so I'll start. I think it's a very, very important question that I thank Victor for presenting, because I think if you use AI correctly and not just, you know, as a black box of computer does things, or to actually present it to the doctor and to the patients, it can actually not only replace but increase the patient-provider communication, make this relationship better. The idea is to make both the product, for example, in our case, a report that is given to the doctor to make a better decision, to give the best information we can give, not just give like a report that says, you know, this medication should work better, but why. How we make this decision, what is it is based on. And when the doctor has it, they are more, I would say, secure, and the relationship between the engagement in care with the patient becomes even better. So it's like utilizing AI to make the relationship better, but not replacing the relationship between the doctor and the patient. That's, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, so
Amir,
just,
do you have any on that?
Yeah, so we just to follow what Amit was saying when we talked to so our product has kind of three audiences. One is the clinician, the physician. The other is the embryologist who sits in the lab, and the other is the patient. And so when we present the solution to the embryologist, jokingly they say, "So you're replacing us? Is that what you're saying?" And there's a lot of that. We're getting back, and of course we say we don't, but we don't have an actual product now in commercialized product. We're going through the regulatory process. But my experience when talking to the clinicians and the embryologists, aside from the patients, these technologies, I don't know, I'm sure in other areas, but in IVF, they have to be, through clinical trials and peer review. They have to get that stamp of approval before people start bringing them into the clinics. There's a lot of suspect and suspicion around new technologies because it's still new. I think once you show the benefit, the value that it brings to everyone, I think there'll be an adoption. It happens with all new technologies.
Great, thank you, Amir.
Sure.
Victor, I wanted just picking up on that thread and also maybe merging with what Suzy was talking about, which is really around what's actually available to use in the marketplace in terms of purchasable product, but versus the sort of what we read about in the papers perhaps, or we hear about on at events and some of the hype around it. Do you see that there on the front line, that perhaps a push that from patients or from governments that's saying, well, you should be doing more, but actually in reality it's not available in the marketplace?
Mm-hmm. So I completely agree with Susan. Surprisingly little is actually used in a day-to-day clinical practice. And again, I can tell you that in Israeli health system, which is very effective, and we go with electronic medical records, unified electronic medical records decades back. We don't use anything that is AI-based or machine learning-based in day-to-day basis. Some places here and there, very sporadically, some things in imaging probably, but not in general use. And I think that this disconnect has several causes. I think the first one would be, and I admit the first in this one, the medicine is a very conservative field. Our underlying principle is primum non nocere, first do not harm. And from 1995, with what you asked about my epidemiology training, when David Sackett actually published evidence-based medicine paradigm, we actually learned and fully accepted that before you start using something, you have to show safety and efficacy of this new technology. And if you look at these papers and you look at the companies working in this area, surprisingly little is proven to be safe and efficacious. And this is a very important distinction. You can be a best predictor ever and you have good predicting systems, but they are not useful because they don't improve your safety and efficacy. At the end of the day, this is how we judge new technologies. Second, there is a fair amount of, I would say, magical thinking that AI somehow looking on this health data, that in parentheses I would say it's incredibly dirty data, because it is not collected primarily for the use as a data, but rather it is a byproduct of our medical profession. But there is a magical thinking that somehow if you just multiply the size of your shoes and divide this by the age of your grandma that she first danced, and then multiply this on your salary, somehow you will get some magic number that will predict something that otherwise physician won't see. And this amount of magical thinking is still very, very prevalent in the industry, and in the community. And then,
yeah, very interesting points there, I think, and quite a good challenge. I wonder, Kyle, if I could just bring you in, because you're working across multiple industries. And do you see that difference that we're talking about, that need for clinical evidence and safety? And do you feel that holds back the health, development of some of these new technologies in the health space compared to some of the other industries?
I might answer that in a different way, if it's okay, Neem. In that,
sure, please do.
Victor made a good point around the lack of understanding with artificial intelligence. And one of the things that Spark Beyond brings to healthcare clients and physicians is a level of explainability and interpretability. So understanding the factors and drivers which are underpinning data. So, for instance, we work with the Clalit Research Institute, who are HMO in Israel, who I'm sure you're all familiar with. And they have a database of nearly 4.5 million patient records. And in conjunction with pharmaceutical organizations and medical research, we've undertaken a number of different projects. For example, we looked at how could we detect colon cancer from colorectal data. And using some of the technologies within our platform, we were able to test a number of hypotheses. And it's very important to understand that actually removing cognitive bias or low dimensionality thinking in the process of building models allows you to surface insights and generate points of interest that one traditionally using traditional data science techniques may not have unearthed or uncovered. So we're looking at 4.5 million patient records, generated some million different insights, and we were able to detect 10 different features. And one of the features was looking at the blood gradient change, iron levels and blood gradient change over 34 to 55 days. Was a biomarker of a likelihood of colon cancer. So as a result, the HMOs and the health systems were able to implement different screening and risk stratification intervention points to Ali's point earlier around population health and risk stratification. But also some learnings that could be reapplied and reused. So again, the fact that we're not a glass box platform, you can see how we've generated those insights, what features and classifiers and descriptors have been used to get there, means it can be reapplied across different medical problems. So if I may, we're also working with Cambridge University at the moment to, and they're using our services as well as our software to detect and predict the severity and lethality of COVID-19. From looking at clinical images such as MRI, CT scans and such like. And their goal or aspiration is to have an open source algorithm which can be shared with healthcare systems globally to prognose and diagnose COVID-19. As you can imagine, that's a long piece of work, but hopefully that's some good examples of where Spark Beyond look to help healthcare systems and physicians and medical research right now.
Oh, thank you, Carl. So I'm going to change tack slightly because we've had a question through from one of the members of the audience who are asking about government links. So are the sort of links that with government robust and involved enough in the sort of technology space? And I wonder, actually, Suzy, I appreciate, you know, the AHSN has got strong links with the NHS, but it'd be interesting to get a perspective on whether you think the government is doing enough, too much, and whether you think there's enough sharing cross-border as well, particularly. I mean, obviously, we're doing this webinar here in conjunction with the and hearing from Israeli experiences, but I wonder if you feel there's enough of that going on.
Sure, of course. I mean, I think there is absolutely a commitment to sustaining the NHS, the publicly funded NHS, through sort of AI technologies and data-driven technology. Really, the sort of long-term plan sets out sort of the ambitions for that. Really, focusing on preventative healthcare, really, and personalised medicine using data. Last year, the AI lab was launched with NHSX in partnership with the Accelerated Access Collaborative. So that's a £250 million fund which supports the sort of translation and adoption of new sort of data technologies into the NHS. That there really is a commitment from policymakers, but they also recognise that it's sort of somewhat uncharted waters, and I think they work closely with organisations like my own and the other AHSN network to really understand what those challenges are on the ground to support and deliver the adoption of. There are ambitions to focus on sort of digitally mature hospitals, looking at sort of digital exemplars that are really ready to sort of accelerate the adoption of these centres, and there's also a focus on engaging the patient and public in parallel with the kind of the movement towards adoption of these solutions, recognising that you can't have one without the other. This June, not long ago, UCL Partners supported a London-wide citizens summit, which talked to patients and public about how they wanted their data to be used in partnership with the healthcare system. And it was really, really important and hopefully the beginning of many opportunities to bring sort of the population along with the acceleration of these solutions and sort of a direct link really into government and policy. I would say they are engaged, and I think we as associated organisations are really that link between.
Great. No, I do think that this government is trying to do a lot in this space, and certainly, as you say, some of the initiatives put forward by the likes of NHSX and others, I think are very, very positive. I mean, Amir, it'd be interesting because you're obviously going through the process of getting approval, etc. Do you feel that that those processes work well in terms of providing the right level of control and some of that evidence that Victor was talking about in terms of showing the safety and efficacy of the solution? Or do you feel it's a hindrance?
Did you say me?
Sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yes, both of them. So we're going through the FDA and CE approval process, and this is such a new area in technology. So I think until recently, you kind of had to fit AI solutions in healthcare. It wasn't very geared towards that, but I think they're understanding it now and trying to make the process is complex anyway to begin with, and I think the cooperative and trying to make it a little more streamlined for companies. But again, there's the regulatory. Even if you do get approved, you still need to have at least in our area, peer-approved research, buy-in from thought leaders, things like that. Which is aside from the regulatory. And just in IVF in general, the market is so segmented and government involvement is so diverse worldwide, from Israel, where the government funds all IVF cycles, unlimited cycles for women until 2 babies. Europe is kind of in the middle. I think the NHS subsidizes 40 or 45%. The cost is maybe £3,000 to £5,000. And America, as usual, is quite expensive. It's about 20,000 cycles. No mandated insurance countrywide. This is each state. Only 15 states mandate some sort of coverage, and again, it's diverse. And so, because of that, in the states, only less than 2% of women who are capable or should be able to have IVF. In the US, only 1.5% actually use it because of cost and access, which is a big 71% of women pay out of pocket in the US. So you can imagine that. So that's another area that we're dealing with.
Yeah, no, and I think that challenge of diversity of many different countries, different standards is always a challenge, particularly for small companies. Amit, is that something that you can relate to as you know, trying to cope with all the different regulatory processes, the different needs, and of course, you know, I think Suzy mentioned it in her intro, some of that complexity of the fragmentation of things like the NHS.
Yeah, so it is indeed hard. The regulatory process of getting CE approval, we got CE approved, is very hard. I would say in some sense it makes sense because of what Victor mentioned, because of the, you know, you want to get, you want to know the clinical efficacy, and you want to know you want to make sure the data is protected. You want to make sure the tool is effective and safe. So you know, we have to find, I think, a better balance between the regulatory process and the products we want to put in the market. I think one major part of this challenge to improve it is to, I think Kyle mentioned it, to have these tools a better explainability, meaning to understand what they really do. And make sure, of course, we protect the data and all of the regulatory parts of it. But I think that's a major part. Once you will be able to connect these two parts of making sure the tools are explainable and it's not a magic box that that does things, but actually how they work, I think it will help this connection between the government and the companies.
Yeah, no, Victor, is that something that you would think is really important from your perspective as a clinician, the explainability angle?
Interesting question, because I'm not that sure about that, because to tell you the truth, there are many medications out there that I have no idea how they work. For me, they are just black box, or for average physician, and I apologize for being an average physician, but I just don't know how they work. And still I have a proof that they work, okay? So, it's nice to have some explanation and whatnot, but I don't think that this is absolutely must to have that. I would say, just add to this, that it's kind of bit of advice to the companies dealing in this field. I think that some of them are not that deep into understanding that they need clinical data prospectively, accumulated clinical data and clinical trials, not studies, trials, showing that the adoption of their technology is actually something that is useful. Because again, I would go back to this point, saying that my model works and predicts X or Y is just not enough. You have to show that it changes something in the life of the patient or health system. It's totally okay. For example, it's just cheaper without changing the outcomes. But I think that funds, and here is the role for the government, I guess, and for the health organization, there is a need for these funds to run these clinical trials, because it is quite an expensive exercise, and small and even medium-sized companies do not have all these funds that are needed to run a good quality clinical trial.
And that's going to be a really interesting area, and particularly, I suppose one of my pet concerns is around data. and data to evidence some of these applications. So we've got clinical trials, but then we've also got the need to have clean data sets that have not been run through these algorithms, so that you can actually then test them in a kind of an environment separately to again prove and ensure they prove, because as models learn, they will adapt. So they're not a static thing in a way, they're an evolving thing. So it's a really fascinating area from a regulatory perspective. I'm conscious we've got about 12 minutes left, so if we have any other questions for the panel from the audience, please do type them in the Q&A box, and we will try and make sure they get answered. While we're waiting to see if there's any other questions, I guess there's a couple of things I'd be interested to pick up on. So I think that point around clinical trials, I wonder if one of the smaller companies here, whichever one you can just start speaking, but do you have a perspective on how achievable that is to provide that level of evidence that Victor's talking about, which is really that kind of gold standard of clinical trials, rather than, shall we say, a proof on paper? I can pick on one of you if you prefer.
I can start. I mean, like, of course, as I think clinical trials are crucial and important, but as I remember who mentioned, we're small companies, and you have to balance that out with the cost, and we have to have in different centers around the world, and not just in one location. But it's something you can partner with other larger companies who have a vested interest in that as well. And we'll see. I mean, I think it will help to have clinical trials. I don't know if I'm sure there are going to be some people who are early adopters will, if you still have FDA and CE approval, they'll implement it. But I think you're going to have clinical trials to get widespread approval. It's just a matter of funding and finding the right institutions within the partner. And the data set size as well. I mean, there's a lot of variables that.
Yeah, and Suzy, I wonder if you have a perspective on that. Should the NHS be making bets or early bets on things and supporting these things through clinical trials?
I mean, I was just going to say, because I think sort of where we try and advocate is, yes, you need clinical evidence, and the clinicians need to be reassured that it's safe and it does what it says it does. But what we try and encourage is that, it's as part of even the early adoption and as part of the clinical trial to validate it in practice, other pieces of evidence are also gathered around its real usability and actually how it affects the system and the pathway, because that's often neglected and is where we as NHS are told that we are the system where there's one pilot after another, and the reason is because opportunities aren't taken as and when you're first sort of beginning to get traction with the health system. So to gather evidence around operational efficiencies and saving time for nurses and doctors, and cost savings, and sort of how it sort of speeds up clinical decision making, these things are going to be what compels the second site to look and look favourably upon the solution, and sort of, I suppose, enable mechanisms to scale, because otherwise you will come across the same questions and, oh, well, it's not like that in my site, oh, it'll be different here, but actually a lot of those key outcomes are going to be the same. So what I would say is the clinical evidence is 100% important, but take the opportunity when you have traction with that first site to gather other evidence that will help you find the second. There are incentives now within the NHS that will help solutions focusing around AI and system-wide improvements, like the movement to integrated care systems, which are going to help the whole pathway recognise the benefits of taking on a product like this. And I think that the time is now, particularly in light of COVID, to sort of look towards the NHS for sort of validating and actually looking at it as the marketplace to really build that evidence base.
Great, no, thank you very much. We haven't got any other questions coming through. So what I wanted to do actually in the last few minutes was really pose two questions. One question to the three startups, and the question to them is really, what's the one request you have of either physicians or governments or healthcare organizations? What's the one thing you would request of them? And let's start with Amir.
Give me your data. You want data? No, but just jokingly.
No, but that's a pretty good request, right?
Yeah,
Access to data.
Everyone doesn't want to talk about it, but that's it's all the data, the different sources of data. We get asked all the time, where's your data from? How much data? And it's important for the algorithm as well. So the benefit so we partner with hospitals and clinics in IVF. They share their data, and we teach our algorithms, but we also work on research. What's in it for them to publish and present at conferences, things like that. You can see I'm the commercial guy.
It's good answer. Good.
Yeah.
Great. Kyle, how about you?
Goodness. Data, certainly, but also it's a collaborative effort, it's a partnership. So we work with Big Pharma on long longitudinal studies and preclinical research, and as well as working with them in advisory capacity and mentoring them, and very much working on the digital disciplines of AI. So how can we understand what data you have within your organization? Do you have healthcare records, prescriptions data, clinical trials, clinical studies data? But actually have a little think about it. What can you bring from the outside world to bring some context and maybe a little bit more holistic approach to trying to assess how successful a patient enrollment program might be, or how to select a site. So from experience, actually augmenting models with census data, footfall data, socio-demographic, socio-determinant data, a richer set of data can provide a level of hypergranularity, I guess. And we saw that with our outbreak prediction modeling efforts with a number of government ministries. So where we looked to map the movement of the virus, the movement of the disease, and help hospitals, healthcare systems, local organizations to implement social policy, social distancing, and such on. And interestingly, one of the things we established using some of the mapping within the AI platform was that petrol pumps at gas stations on highways were super transmitters, and as a result, governments changed tact around how they were opened up and used. So yeah,
duly noted.
Good to know.
What was that? Sorry.
I'll put alcohol gel in the car.
I've gone off to make a note now. Sanitize after doing petrol.
Good. Well, we've learned something.
Right. And Mitch, how about yourself?
So I would join my two fellow speakers here and say that data is the most challenging part, and that we need collaboration with. I would say also I would maybe emphasize something Suzy mentioned, which is not only understand how the product works, but how we can actually incorporate it in the pipeline or in the flow of physicians in real life. I mean, you can have the best tool you can have, but if it's not well incorporated and the agencies you work with, whether it be governments or other, you have to understand how you incorporate the tool so it would benefit everyone. The patients, the doctors, the physicians, in our case, the psychiatrists. You have a limited time at the clinic, and you have all this, full stack like pipeline of things that happen, and you have to understand how you incorporate the tool. I think it's important for all people throughout this pipeline to understand how we do that with our tools, how we do it. Yeah.
Super. And then for Suzy and Victor, I guess a slightly different question. I'd be interested to get your level of optimism around seeing a practical application of AI in the next, let's say, 2 to 3 years, and why? Victor.
I'm absolutely sure, 100%, it will be there. How and in what form, I have no idea. But just to a bit to change your question to the companies, what is one ask that I have from the companies? It is to come to us and actually study the problem on the field level. What is that we are lacking? Not what you think that we are lacking, but actually what we are looking for. I would envision that the engineer, the data scientist will be part of, say, morning rounds in the department, or will be sitting in the doctor's offices, because you need to study the problem before you offer the solution.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. The data scientist on the morning rounds.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We'd love to
either question. Do you want so either the one ask you have of the companies, or your level of optimism?
So I think I'd agree completely with Victor, and that was going to be one of my suggestions, is that don't be frightened to look at sort of a co-development type of collaboration with a hospital or trust, because often they will be much more buy-in and understanding of how you work as a company, your ethics, the way you use data. If you sort of look at really partnering and as Victor's described, understanding the actual problem. I think I'd also say don't be frightened to, or not frightened, do consider how you as a company want to engage patient and public in what you're doing. You know, it's probably very refreshing for a hospital to be approached by a company that has a sort of PPIE strategy and is thinking about, you know, ensuring the patients have confidence in what you're developing. In terms of the future, I would say sort of all this world post-COVID, you know, it's all about sort of keeping patients away from hospital, remote diagnostics. How can AI be used within national screening programs? How it's used to help sort of, you know, virtualize outpatient clinics. All of these things are going to be key. And sometimes, you know, the sort of traction at that kind of recognizing the need sort of early on in some of those use cases is key. And that's where you're beginning to see that more in the NHS. It's going to be around applications that aren't too sort of broad at the moment, but more around sort of keeping people away from hospital. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I think that's a really good area to look at. And I suppose I would add the other area, it's easy to focus on, shall we say, healthcare related AI, but there's a whole bunch of administrative burden that sits around the hospital, and there are great applications that we see in other industries for AI in terms of reducing the burden, the administrative burden on clinical staff, that kind of thing, which doesn't require the same level of, shall we say, clinical trial standards and so on and so forth. So I always have a plea, like don't forget just getting rid of the boring stuff, so then clinicians can focus on the bit that they really enjoy doing. So we have come to the end of our session. I just wanted to say a very big thank you to our 3 startups and our two speakers. I thought that was a really interesting discussion. You've all been fantastic and really engaged, and thank you for the audience as well for popping in a question or two there. I hope you've had an enjoyable discussion, and I think we are now coming to a close. Is that correct, Ivana?